It's loading, and while it loads, I just want to welcome you to our Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium second annual summit. We initially had this summit last year when we were aspiring to educate our work group. So we're formally aspiring to educate, and now the newly formed Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium. And we're so pleased that you're here with us today. And the title of our summit is Reaping What We Sow, Enriching the Soil to Cultivate and Sustain Culturally Relevant and Anti-Racist Educators in Pennsylvania. And so I want to start with a Mentimeter. I've already put the Mentimeter link in the chat, so you can go ahead and click on that. And the question for the Mentimeter is one thing that is important to me about diversifying the educator workforce in Pennsylvania is I'm already hearing from folks, and what I'm hearing is having students see people who look like them in successful leadership roles, representation, providing positive role models for all. And so keep clicking on that, adding information to that Mentimeter. Students need teachers who look like them. These are some of the responses that you can see in the Mentimeter. Shaping an anti-racist future. And I'm carrying on about this, and I didn't even introduce myself to you all. So Donna Marie Cole-Malott, former special assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Higher Education. I work now to support the expansion of the teacher diversity work in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, and also with PEDC. So that's a lot of what I've been doing recently. So keep adding to that. I'm seeing some voices here, representation of diversity in education for children and families, improving student outcomes. The success of all students depends on it. We can no longer be effective without the diversification of the educator workforce in Pennsylvania. So I encourage you to keep working on it. So the summit purpose for today, and I'm gonna go through the purpose, and then I'm also gonna touch on some more details about why we're here, right? So we're here to engage you all in this important dialogue about diversity, the teacher educator diversity in Pennsylvania. So that's why we're here today. We want to elevate a shared vision about new opportunities and the tools that we need to mobilize, prioritize, and take actionable steps towards increasing the number of Black and Latinx educators in Pennsylvania. And we also want to focus on developing a culturally relevant and sustaining education in Pennsylvania. So those are some of the goals for today, our purpose for today. Our objectives, which are a little bit more detailed, and I want to get through these, right? To examine the vital role of the preparation, recruitment, hiring, and retention of highly effective, culturally relevant, and sustaining pre-K through 20 educators as foundational to dismantling systemic racism across Pennsylvania's ecosystem. Identify how local education agencies, institutions of higher education, and community-based organizations can utilize data to examine trends, assess challenges, and set goals for increasing educator diversity locally, regionally, and statewide. We also want to center the voices, and you'll see that today. We want to center the voices and experiences of Black and Latinx students and educators in the identification of action steps relating to the need for culturally relevant and sustaining education, teacher effectiveness, and equity and diversity in the educator workforce as well. We want to explore strategies and tools for implementation of the consortium's culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies, as well as initiatives related to the recruitment, mentorship, and retention of Black and Latinx teachers. Those are loaded objectives, but that's what we want to accomplish for today. So here's the challenge that we face, and it's not just a Pennsylvania challenge, it's a national challenge, right? But our specific challenge is that there's a lack of transparency regarding teacher diversity data in Pennsylvania. We need to be more transparent about what that looks like. No specific articulated goals towards teacher diversity. That's really left to the districts and LEAs. The inability for diversity of the workforce to keep up with student diversity. So as our student diversity continues to grow, the numbers of teachers of color is unable to keep up with that. We also have a regression in our efforts to diversify the workforce in terms of funds that's provided for programs such as Aspiring to Educate. So our keynote speaker today is going to talk a little bit about data, what Pennsylvania looks like. But what Pennsylvania looks like today, this year, looks very different than it did last year. We're regressing in terms of our funds for teacher diversity, and that needs to be prioritized. There's also low enrollment of teachers of color at institutions of higher education, and that also needs to be addressed. And the teachers of color continually leave districts in PA, leaving 50% of districts with only, without one teacher of color. And so our keynote is going to talk about that as well. But we do have an opportunity. Today is the opportunity. We can begin to pilot our culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies. We have competencies to share with you. Folks can begin to adopt those. You can take that back to your school, take that back to your institution, your organization. You can begin to pilot those competencies. We encourage districts across the Commonwealth to use funds from the American Rescue Plan. Use those dollars towards teacher diversity initiatives at your organization, at your institution. Find ways to implement those competencies at your organization, at your institution. Use those dollars intentionally to diversify the workforce. And finally, join the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium to stay connected to information and to gain support for your own efforts. You have a community of folks who are committed to this. We're here, and we encourage you to join us, to engage in conversation, to share resources, to share information so that we can do this work together. You're not alone in your efforts and your intention to diversify, and in all of those things that you listed in the Mentimeter. There is a group of individuals that are here working on this, and we encourage you to join us. So I'm gonna turn it over to, I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna turn it over to Juliet Kersey so she could introduce herself and then take us to our keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn Marie. Appreciate it. That was a great overview. I'm gonna also share my screen quickly. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Juliet Kersey, Assistant Dean of College Access and Persistence at Temple University's College of Education and Human Development. I serve as the convener for the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium, and I have the pleasure of introducing this morning's keynote speaker, Eric Duncan. In January, members of the consortium recognized we needed to really have a grasp of the data about teacher diversity in Pennsylvania, situated in the context of the data from the rest of the country. A committee developed around exploring the data included in the Teacher Diversity and Equity Scan from the Education Trust. And we're so fortunate to have Eric, one of the authors of the report, to situate us right in the middle of that data. This backdrop will serve as the foundation from which we will enrich the soil over the next 2 days with new knowledge and strategies for increasing the number of teachers of color and culturally responsive and sustaining educators in Pennsylvania. Eric has a very impressive bio, and that bio is available on the website, and we'll make sure that you have a link to it. I think the thing about him that he most wants everyone to know is that he's an Atlanta Hawks fan, and he is relishing in the Hawks win over the Sixers in Game 7 of the playoffs Sunday night. He threatened to wear a Hawks t-shirt. I haven't seen him yet, so I'm not sure if he thought better of that. Eric has worked for West Ed, CCSSO, NCTQ, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of the Secretary, and as a high school social studies teacher. He received his undergraduate degree from Emory University and Juris Doctorate from Wake Forest University. His research and policy work has consistently focused on equity, teacher diversity, and teacher effectiveness. We are grateful for your time, Eric, and with that, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Juliet, for that kind introduction. Sorry, y'all, I know it might be a little bit too soon to talk about the way we sent the 76ers back home to you. So I won't belabor that, but I appreciate that introduction. Really excited to be here and talk to this really esteemed group, and I've had a pleasure, great time working with Juliet and the team to prepare this event and this meeting. I'm going to share my screen as well, so bear with me. All right. So as Juliet said in her introduction, the Ed Trust has really tried to pull together as much information about what states across the country are doing to increase the racial diversity of the workforce. And I'm going to point you in the direction of our 50 state scans a little later, but want to put Pennsylvania in a little bit of a context with other states across the country, and hopefully some fairly comparable states, so that you all have the information needed to push policy makers and leaders in your state to really do the work of setting goals and investing meaningfully in strategies to increase the diversity of the workforce, given where we are in this context. Quick poll. I don't know if this is available. If not, okay, great. So in the spirit of looking at other states, which state of these four do you think invests the most in Grow Your Own program, programming, which included a $2 million investment in September using CARES Act funds, so federal funding, to aid districts in developing Grow Your Own programs? I'll wait for a minute or so, and then we'll see the results. Also give you a little hint. While I grew up in Atlanta, I have connections to Columbus, Ohio. My family's from Ohio, so I'm a big Ohio State fan. So that may be able to allow you to limit the available choices, because I would never highlight one of these states because of the rivalry. Yes, we got some fellow Bucks. Ooh. Hawks in Ohio State, yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. I like the chat. All right, maybe give folks a few more seconds to enter their answers, and then we can share the results. Well, that's why I'm enjoying these W's while I can, Edwin. All right.
You're good, Eric.
Good?
Yeah, we can close.
All right. So our answer is, all right. New Jersey got a lot of love here. Wow. Okay. Guess the neighbors get some love. New Jersey has done a lot of great work. We could learn a lot from the state education agency there, but Tennessee is the answer. Tennessee recently also, and we'll go into some of the policies that they passed recently, but they've dedicated a sizable amount of their federal funds to programming like Grow Your Own programs to increase the diversity of the workforce. And so given some of the budgetary challenges or lack of investment in programs and sustainability of programs locally in Pennsylvania, there could be some, I think, lessons learned from some of the work that Tennessee and other states have done to utilize the influx of federal funds that this administration has put into the education systems across our country. Thank you for indulging me. So Juliet went through my professional introduction, but wanted to share with you all a photo, and you guys are active in the chat, so I hope you continue this, but this was Big Head me back in the day. And while I tell a quick story, would love folks in the chat, let's see who our pop culture warriors are. You'll see this picture. This is a photo from the mid to late 90s. And this is a People magazine photo, I guess, or cover, where me and my friends are doing some type of crossword or something. I don't know what we're doing. But there's a picture of a bunch of stars. So while I tell the story, we'd love for you all to try to identify who these stars are. And then we'll compare notes at the end of my quick story. So I put this up here, the next couple slides are just sort of to ground us and why we're here. Everyone is really dedicated to this work. And most of this is personal for us, right? So these are two of my friends that I grew up with in Atlanta. This was right around the time of the O.J. Simpson verdict. I don't know if you guys remember that trial back in the mid-90s. And one of the things I remember vividly, I was a little young, so I didn't quite understand the severity of the case and trial. You just sort of heard your parents and adults talking about it. Yeah, I remember, me too. I remember exactly where I was when the verdict was announced, because my teacher pulled me out of class and said, hey, I'll let you see the verdict. It was such a big deal. And allowed me to see it, but told me not to tell my friends. Of course, I ran and told my two friends, Kim and Jonathan, what happened. Not really understanding the significance, but I remember the TV coverage. There were, I don't know if you guys recall, the sort of split screens showing different reactions across the country. And there were, Black faces that were really excited, and you would see sort of white faces, down. And I didn't really understand it. I was young. And so I remember vividly going to basketball practice with my friend Jonathan, and our coach sitting us down, Black coach, basically talking about why it was it was significant for him to see what was going on with the result of the trial, and seeing a Black man actually going through the criminal justice system and receiving what they thought or perceived was a fair trial. And just remembering sort of the significance of that and putting it in the context of what my reality was as a Black boy growing up in Atlanta. And so, it just shows, and I think highlights the importance of having people who look like you share your experiences, give you a little bit more of an understanding in a context of what's going on in your society, in your world, and why it's important to have those connections, to have those real conversations. And so let's go quickly to the photos. I see some Courtney Love and Marilyn Monroe. That's actually, no, that's not right. David Wright, wow. Robin Williams, we have Goldie Hawn, we have Brooke Shields. That's impressive, David. Steven Spielberg. And then this is actually Madonna. So kind of hard to see, but and then Sharon in the bottom right. So a little trip down memory lane. Okay, let's get into the work. So thanks for indulging me in that. I'll quickly go over sort of the national context for educator diversity, and then talk about the use of this tool, this 50-state teacher diversity data and policy scan, and then go a little bit into what Tennessee has done recently and within the context of the influx of federal funding, and then offer what I think could be this group's potential next steps in terms of policy recommendations, ways to increase the diversity of the workforce in a collective statewide way. Okay, so why are we here? I think it's really helpful to set this in the historical context. In a lot of ways, this was the conditions that we have now and the lack of diversity that we see was produced and caused by intentional actions, right? So you can point, I think, pretty clearly to what happened post Brown v. Board of Education. So pre-segregation, the segregated schools, or during the era of segregation, teachers of color taught students of color. So for an example, there were around 82,000 Black teachers in the South right when the verdict or the court case was determined to end segregation legally in the United States. Just 10 years later, so during this era of integration, post 1954, teachers of color, for a variety of reasons, were sort of deemed unable to teach white students. As Black schools were closed, teachers of color, Black teachers were fired There were licensure policies that were developed, ways to sort of, from a policy perspective, get rid of Black teachers and sort of deem them as unable to teach. And so just 10 years later, the workforce of 82,000 Black teachers was cut almost in half. And so just to remember, and this started sort of a legacy of exclusionary practices to keep Black teachers out of the classroom, teachers of color out of the classroom. And so just putting that into context, this isn't an accident. There were laws, systems, structures put in place to create the conditions that we see today. And so the only way to break these trends is to intentionally create policies and laws to effectuate change. Quick national context, close to 50% of American students identify as students of color, but over 80% of the workforce, teacher workforce, identifies as white. We know the benefits, the teachers who share students' racial and ethnic backgrounds. We can talk about academic outcomes, but some of the non-academic outcomes that we see that are contributing to ultimately positive academic gains are lower suspension rates, higher graduation rates, and the concept of having role models and folks that you can see yourself in teaching is just so important and meaningful. Access is an issue. So this was alluded to a little earlier. It's not just that the workforce in total doesn't match the diversity of the workforce doesn't match the diversity of the student population, but kids are going to school with no teachers of color on record. And so one example, and we can look at this at the state level in Pennsylvania as well, but in North Carolina, 50% of students did not have a single Black teacher in elementary school. And so just the importance of that, given all of the positive and beneficial aspects of having same-race teachers, this really is an equity issue. And the gaps in representation are particularly wide nationally for Latinx students. So over 25% of U.S. students identify as Latino or Latina, compared to fewer than 10% of teachers. So that's sort of from a national perspective where we're standing. So I'll quickly go through an overview of the data and policy scans and focus in on Pennsylvania. But the goal of the scans really were to provide a set of data, state level and in some places district level data, to assess the issue of educator diversity, the lack of access for students of color and all students really, in having teachers of color in their schools and in their classrooms, and then rating each state on sort of 5 policy criteria with some sub criteria under each. And the 5 are, does the state have visible and actionable data? And we asked 4 questions that were related to that. Does the state set clear goals and have some type of accountability measures to ensure that these goals are being monitored, tracked, and that there's progress towards these goals? Does the state invest in teacher preparation programs to bring in students of color, to support prospective teachers of color, and to hold the programs accountable for setting their own goals and creating their own strategies to increase diversity of their student population? Are there intentional investments in recruiting? And what we'll see is Pennsylvania sort of rating higher in this because of programs like Aspire to Educate. But this has sort of evolved as we see the funding aspect of this sort of paints this in a different light. And then does the state invest in efforts to improve retention outcomes for teachers of color in particular? And so thank you, Sophie, for putting this in the chat. Feel free as I go through this to sort of click around the data and policy scans. And even if you want to go into Pennsylvania and follow me, Sophie put the link to the main site and to Pennsylvania into the chat. And Kathy, I'll address your question shortly. Let me just quickly do an overview of Pennsylvania. So this is a screenshot of Pennsylvania. For each state, we have sort of the demographic breakdown of students and teachers. And if you scroll down a little further, you'll see one of the more compelling points, which is what percentage of schools have no teachers of color on staff, right? And so this varies across states, but in Pennsylvania, what we found was over 50% of schools did not have a single teacher of color on record, right? So just that lack of access and what we understand is the benefits of teachers of color in diverse workforces is hurting kids and their ability to get a world-class education that Pennsylvania should be able to provide. And then you'll see a report card. As I talked about earlier, one of the big reasons why we rated Pennsylvania green was because of this Aspire to Educate investment, intentional investment in partnerships and growing your own programming and opportunities to build pipelines so that districts and schools were able to attract more diverse candidates. And I think this sort of ties into Kathy's question about rural school districts having difficulty attracting and recruiting professionals. And so we really saw the value of these pipeline programs, these grow your own programs. Grow your own programs were initially designed to alleviate teacher shortages in rural districts, in rural schools, right? And what was exposed about these programs was that they actually were high leverage recruitment and retention strategies to bring in and support teachers of color, right? And so these targeted investments, Tennessee is a state that I think demographically may emulate in a lot of ways Pennsylvania, where it's a fairly large state with a lot of rural districts, right? And fairly large city centers. And one of the things that Tennessee has tried to do is double down, triple down, quadruple down on this grow your own teacher strategy, and have invested a ton of money in creating the right programs and learning from these programs, right? Texas is also another state of the two, I think, two really good examples of states that invest in grow your own programs intentionally, not just putting policies in place to reward paraprofessionals for going back to school, but actually setting up and investing in the partnerships and the learning, the communities of practice, bringing districts together to learn from one another and to share some of the practices that they've had. And they have sustained these programs through investments either at the state level or use of federal funds. So that's another sort of important way to fund some of this work. So what I'm going to focus on is the sort of first two areas. I think the way we try to design these policy scans, we believe that the data and goal setting is foundational, and strategies will flow from there, right? So when you look at this, the sort of framework of this, setting the right goals, creating the right data transparency, sharing the information to advocates, stakeholders in the state, and setting clear goals, right? Saying, as a state, we envision our workforce looking like this in X years. Or as a state, we expect LEAs and prep programs to set goals that meet certain targets, right? And reporting those outcomes at the state level. That is paramount. And you see states like in Oregon who for years now have held their LEAs and their prep programs accountable for creating strategies, goals, and have backed that up through investments at the state level to support that work. And then have reported each year, here's where we are with our numbers, here's what we've done, here's what we can do better, and here's sort of what we're going to do in the next year. it has incrementally supported their the diversification of their workforce. And so that's sort of where we want to lean in on. Pennsylvania, as we've sort of already discussed, can do a much better job at data transparency, right? I think at the state level, there's a lot of capacity, a lot of infrastructure to create data systems that are transparent and provide school level data for the diversity of the workforce, but it just hasn't been done yet. And then I think this group can really be a key push to ensure that the state has set goals that are publicly available and are sort of being held, the state is being held accountable for. And so we're going to look at quickly an example of Tennessee and see sort of what they've done. And real quick, I'm going to go to the chat, broken down by race and gender. We don't have it broken down by gender, which would be, I think, a really good data point to include at the state level, right? Because we see I think there's definitely different experiences based on gender, male and female, and the importance of for Black male students having Black male teachers. And then school boards, higher education administration. I think that's another really good area, Anita, to do some data collecting. Thank you, Laura, for answering that in the chat. Okay. So I encourage you to sort of play around with the tool and compare Pennsylvania to other states. But what I'm going to do is really hone in on what Tennessee has done in the last 6 months or so to really double down on some of the investments that they've already made. So Tennessee has been one of the states that's been pretty transparent with their data for a long time and have allowed some of the advocates in the state and stakeholders there to coalesce around some of the problems that have emerged from the data. And one of the big things that arose from just this pure data transparency and stated commitment to invest in strategies to increase the racial diversity of the workforce is advocates at the state level said, we need to have a policy, right? A state policy in which the LEAs in our state are held accountable for setting goals, right? For investing in a set of strategies that are deemed as research-based, evidence-based to increase the diversity of the workforce. And the state is transparent each year, or at least periodically, in sharing what does our data show each year, and how we progress, and what are we doing to invest in more strategies or to change and pivot from the strategies that we've previously invested in that haven't worked. And so a couple of things that they've done. We talked a little bit about the 2 rounds of federal investments in Grow Your Own programming. I think that's a really good model to learn from, where the influx of federal funding, there's a ton of money that's coming into at the state level, was used to create a grant program or to fund a grant program similar to Aspire to Educate, where the state provided millions of dollars for districts and prep programs to partner and continue to invest in growing your own strategies and programming. And so the first round was in September, like I said. But if you look at Tennessee State Plan, which the Department of Ed has actually released the first round of state plans, they've targeted another investment or are planning on using another investment to sustain this Grow Your Own program that they helped to fund through the first round of funding through the CARES Act. But then, like I said, this teacher diversity policy, and I screenshotted this monitoring educator diversity at the state level because it's so important, right? This was put into law in February. And I think it should be linked in the chat. And my apologies, LEA is local education agency. So that's either a district or, in New Orleans, it's parish or charter networks. Those are sort of the local education agencies. And so the policy is only 4 pages, and I can link to it. But it again creates this imperative and law that says the state has to set goals, that each district in the state must set goals as well. And there's a long list of strategies from recruitment of educators of color to the retention of educators of color that LEAs can use as part of their strategic approach. And there's this progress monitoring, that I think is vital, and I included this here, where the state is responsible for compiling these data and sharing a report every other year on the website to show sort of the state of educator diversity in the state of Tennessee. But these last two, I think, are critically important. One is that they are tasked with providing TA to working groups in Tennessee. And the other is they're tasked with providing TA and grant funding to help districts establish these pipeline initiatives and really start to increase the diversity of the workforce over a sustained period of time. So it's, I think, a good law or lever, I would say, to hold the state accountable for continuing to invest in these approaches. And Tennessee is one of the states that I think demographically is fairly similar in terms of the sort of a couple bigger city centers, but a lot of rural districts. And so I think they're a state that can, it potentially is a peer state that you all can learn from and connect with and use to push Pennsylvania to do a little bit more. Okay, so I think a couple of things that I think this group can really do to ensure that the next 6 months to a year, the investments are continued or re-upped or more is done at the state level to increase the diversity of the workforce. Monitor the state, and this is ESSER is the federal law that created the amount of funding that are going to each state. Like I said, on the Department of Ed's website right now, there are 28 state plans, and there's a section that each state has to fill out that is basically, what is your plan for teacher diversity, for ensuring that there's diverse educators? And you can see what other states are doing. Pennsylvania's is not up yet, but I think seeing what other investment states are making with this federal funding and ensuring that that states or that Pennsylvania is dedicated to this work and following up with them on what they propose as ways to invest their funding, I think is a good immediate next step to support some of the work that I think you all want to see supported. The data collection and goal setting, I think it's really important that you know, the foundation of this work is around what does the data show, where do we need to target resources and investments, and what should our goals look like over the course of a number of years, right? I think putting that in the foundation, into the foundation of the work that's being done can help to drive strategies and approaches like investments in grow your own programming, like investments in residency models, like some of the research informed work that we see. And then the accountability piece is extremely important. And I included Oregon in this because we talked about this before. Having that state report periodically that says, here's what we've done, here's where we're going, and here's what our data show, right? It is a very important sort of accountability measure. It's a way to say, state, you know, you say you're invested in this work, but what have you done and what are you planning on doing? And then you can start to monitor the progress towards that work. So I recommend looking at again, Oregon even created 2021 or 2020 equity report. They're pretty long, but if you sort of skim through them, you'll see the structures of it and how well they track and monitor progress towards their goals. So it's extremely important to do that. Okay, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. Let's see. Privacy in collecting the data. Oh, that's a really good question. So, yeah, I mean, there's sort of a voluntary aspect of this, but I haven't heard as many, I guess, concerns about educators reporting their racial and ethnic status. But I think that's a really good concern. And also wanting to name something, and I really appreciate Ed when talking about the racial justice work. I think it fits very, very clearly and cleanly into this. You know, a lot of the work that's being done around educator diversity and the value of it is sort of couched in this concept of what are the things that teachers of color do really well, in particular for students of color. And that's where the culturally responsive practices, culturally responsive pedagogy comes into play, right? There are key aspects of why Black teachers are so good with at teaching in classrooms, or why teachers of color are so beneficial to all students, when in particular teachers or students of color. And I think a lot of that is about sort of the culturally responsive practices, right? The understanding and empowering students to be aware of racial justice, aware of the role that race plays in our society, and having those crucial conversations with those students. And so, you know, I think it's important to always couch that into the discussion. Thank you for sharing, Dion, the Tennessee approaches. There's some definite innovative approaches and a lot of funding going towards it. The state has really dedicated a lot of work to it. And so, great follow-up about the Office of Civil Rights as well. So yeah, I think as I close out, I just want to say you guys are an incredible group of folks who, through your dedication to this work, I think will continue to drive the state to keep investing in programs that they've sort of promised and have highlighted and touted as promising programs. The Aspire to Educate program, I think it can be a really beneficial sort of starting point. And through federal funding, through advocating for continued resources and investment, I think there's a real opportunity to help increase the diversity of the workforce. And what I hope would be sort of seeding this concept of grow your own programs, partnerships between programs and districts. And so I hope that you all continue to fight for that and hold the state accountable through even this huge influx of federal funding to do this work. I'm always around, so feel free to reach out if you have questions or concerns. And I hope that you visit the 50 state scans and see what other states are doing in these spaces and in these areas. So I appreciate being here. In my